Go. We're recording.
Hi, everyone. I'm Janet Long. I lead our Career Design and Development Department, and we're so pleased to have our students and alumni and colleagues joining us to kick off our Zoom speaker series. Today, we're going to be talking about mastering the art of virtual networking for introverts, extroverts, and everyone. And you may all know that it can be hard enough to overnight just translate into this online world, but then on top of it, how we approach it as an introvert, as an extrovert, or for many of us somewhere in between can make a difference. So we wanted to talk today with two experts, one who's going to bring an introvert perspective, the other an extrovert. We're just going to be having a conversation, kicking some ideas around. And so it's my pleasure to introduce Jane Finkel and Matt Adams. I'd like to tell you just a little about each of them before we start. So Jane Finkel, who will be representing the introverted perspective, is a longtime career coach with more than 25 years of experience. She was an associate director at the University of Pennsylvania, also launched a signature Wharton program. She has had her work publicized in national and international media outlets. And most recently, she authored a new book called The Introverts' Complete Career Guide from Landing a Job to Surviving, Thriving, and Moving on Up. And then complementing Jane from the extrovert perspective, we have Matt Adams. Matt is currently a financial advisor with the Princeton Group in Yardley, and that's a perspective that may come in handy for many of us on the line as well. And Matt's background prior to that was as a global recruiter working with C-level executives all over Europe. And so he brings the recruiting perspective as well. He is also going to be offering his own program on how to make your CV stand out in the crowd. And we are going to be including a link to that in the chat information so that you all have it. So with that, we're going to start the conversation. And Jane and Matt, I wondered if you could each first share a networking story that you really like, both from an introvert and from an extroverted perspective, maybe someone who you coached or even your own. So why don't we start with Jane?
Well, I'm first of all, I'm excited to be here, especially I know what a difficult period this is, and any way that I can help, I'm really glad to do that. I'm also excited because I'm the introvert and I'm the first to speak. So, excuse me. The story I'm going to tell is about a client that, excuse me, sorry, I have trouble with my voice here for a minute, who I counseled, who tended to be leaning towards introversion, although she had a huge list of network contacts. And she was in real estate development. And she was very interested in transferring those skills to work at a university. She had come from a very difficult economic circumstances. She was the first in her family to go to college. So she wanted to be in that environment because college had transformed her experience and had been just very uplifting. So she wanted to be in that environment. So what happened is she did get a name from an acquaintance, wasn't even a close friend, of somebody at a local university who was working in the real estate facility area at the university. And she used that person's name to contact the vice president of that division. And she wasn't sure the vice president even knew that acquaintance. But she wrote a really lovely letter, and he responded. And she went in, and her goal was just to find out, what's going on at the university in terms of their real estate and how they're managing their buildings. And they just developed this great rapport. And what happened is he had only been there for 8 months. So he was totally restructuring the department and really felt her skills were a great fit. And he said, well, I really think you would be a wonderful asset. go ahead and write your job description. Can you imagine? So she wrote a job description. Obviously, he had to approve of it, and HR had to approve of it. But it turned out to be one of her ideal jobs. And it was just based on the fact that she followed her curiosity and her interest and moved beyond the nervousness or any amount of hesitancy. So
That's a great story, Jane. What strengths do you think she brought to the table as an introvert in that case?
I think she did enormous preparation. So I remember seeing her letter, and the letter, talked a little bit about her background and why she was interested, which I think it was inspirational. And once she got there, she is the kind of person who spent many, many hours in preparation. And I think in this case, she did her homework, and learned as much as she could about the person that she was going to speak with and about the department. So I think that made it really effective for her.
So a lot of that preparation. And so thank you for sharing that. And Matt, let's bring it over to you. Can you tell a success story as well?
Sure, absolutely. I want to thank everybody for having me here today. I'm looking forward to bringing the extroverts perspective on everything. And following this story, I think you can see why I'm a little bit more on that. My networking success story happens from my days back as a headhunter in London. I was just out of university, just like some of yourselves, looking to build a book of clients. And I got the opportunity to work with a managing director for one of the top banks in London at the time. And I be on the phone call. I wasn't his first choice. I was in a group of about 10 other people, and I was like, how can I possibly stand out on this? And on the briefing, he briefly mentioned that his wife was American. I'm like, perfect. That's something I can work with. So following the call, I went to an American gift store, and I bought, remember those little tiny cereal boxes of Corn Pops, Frosted Flakes, whatever it was. I bought like 4 or 5 of them, and I said, hey, I dropped it off at his office, and I said, I heard your wife was American. We're coming up towards 4th of July. These are some of the things that I would look for, just a little bit of taste for home. Of course, he goes back because this kid is a nut job. He just dropped off a present. Absolutely loved it. And his wife made him go out for drinks with me and her, and we ended up having a great time. It broke down the barrier. And then on top of that, the wife then introduced me to a bunch of her friends who also happened to be managing directors at some of the other banks. Once you get into some of these networking circles, very, very, everybody kind of knows everybody. So once you get your in, and you find the center of influence, you're able to kind of crack the nut. And I was able to build the start of my career as a headhunter based on taking a little bit of a risk, doing a little bit out of the ordinary, but being able to properly follow up and finding the right people and getting into a network just because I was American. So that's a bit of my story.
Yeah, Matt, that's a fantastic story. And it sounds like a lot of that came to you naturally as an extrovert. What skills or natural strengths do you think you built upon to make that happen?
Well, when you're an extrovert, sometimes you get a couple of crazy ideas in your head and you don't really plan about it or think about it. You just go ahead and do it. So as an extrovert, that one worked out. I guess some of the natural skills that you have to be able to do is you do have to trust your instinct, but also trust your instincts to not do what everybody else is doing, to be a little bit different, as well as to make the first step. I could have turned around and said, this guy's crazy, I don't want him anywhere near, I'm never letting him call me again. I got lucky, if I'm being honest, but at the same time, taking that chance, taking that opportunity, and then trying to figure out how you can make things work is really something that extroverts are very good at.
Okay, thank you for that. And now we're going to build on both of those stories and speak a little more in general about networking techniques that work the best, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. So I think this time we're going to start with Matt. As an extrovert, what in general are some of the techniques that are your go-tos?
Well, there's a variety of different things that I usually start. If I'm looking to network with somebody, I'm always looking for any information that puts something in common with that network that I'm trying to be in. Is that person American? When I was abroad, Americans love to band together. Do we go to the same school? Do we have the same interests? If then somebody wants to talk to me about the Eagles and how we can't pick up a wide receiver, about that for days, and I have no problem doing that. And I want to engage with people who are like that. And if you'll find when you're looking out and you're networking, people want to talk about themselves. They want to talk about things that you have in common, and they can talk for ages about that first. So my first go-to is always try to find something in common, something interesting about them that I can build up and I can speak to.
Great. And Matt, I have a little note from one of my technical co-hosts. Your Wi-Fi is coming across maybe a little bit distorted, so maybe you could slow it just a touch. That would be great.
Sure, not a problem.
Okay, and thank you for that. And now, Jane, so let's turn it to you as an introvert who coaches other introverts. What do you see as the strengths in general that introverts can build on in networking?
Well, it's a great question. And I also want to reinforce that it's a myth that introverts aren't good at networking. It's just a matter of preparation. So as long as they have a chance to plan in advance, they do just fine. But it's also important for them to think of the skills that they bring. So introverts are natural listeners and they observe really well. So I think when you're building a relationship, the fact that you can listen well is of great value. Because I think the person, you're being quiet and you're being respectful. And I think that's really something that encourages the person who's speaking. The other thing that I think is highly valuable for introverts is that they have this ability to concentrate. So when they're thinking about who they're going to talk to, they can use that concentration to dig deep, find out everything they need to know about the speaker, think about some insightful questions. The other thing is introverts often are very good at reflection. They like it. They like to think carefully before they speak up. So they can use that reflection to think carefully about what is it they want to say about themselves. They're not going to have any trouble thinking about questions to ask the other person or doing their research. But when it comes to talking about themselves, that's where they start to have a challenge. So if they can think of what they're going to say in advance, they usually do quite well.
Okay, great. So we've been speaking about networking in general, and one of the challenges or the differences in the current environment is that all of our networking is taking place online. So welcome to networking all the time on social media. So I wonder here if we could start with Jane. What's different about networking on social media, and what advice would you have for our graduating seniors and alumni to make the most of it?
Right. Well, nothing replaces in person, but we have so many tools that help us connect. And I would say that actually social media is a gift to introverts, because often they get a little anxious when they enter a room and they don't know people. But the chance to sort of introduce themselves in writing first, if they're reaching out to a contact, is a lot more comfortable for them. And I think the big thing, as I was saying before, especially because it's online, is to be thinking very carefully about what do you want to say about yourself. And, we always talk about the 30-second elevator speech. And I've always, maybe it's because I'm introverted, I've always hated that term because people get stuck in elevators and they don't talk to each other. So I have like a formula called the Savvy Formula. And it's just sort of an outline of the things that you can be thinking of in terms of introducing yourself or talking about yourself. And so each letter of the Savvy Formula focuses on content about yourself. So S is for synopsis. It's just an overview of your experience. A is accomplishments, and I want to reinforce how important it is for everyone to be highlighting some accomplishments, because employers are looking for how you can add value. And even if you're in school, you've been involved in leadership activities, or maybe you've done some interesting projects in classes or internships, and those are things that you can highlight. And then Values has to do with skills that you might bring to a certain field or industry. Virtue is personality qualities about, what makes you unique, you're creative and enthusiastic. And why is what are you interested in? Why are you talking? Why do you want to talk to this person in the first place? So I think, again, it's just a way that introverts, and actually anyone, can think in advance of how they're going to introduce themselves.
Oh, that is a great tip and an acronym, and we are going to share that with everyone who's online, if that's okay with you, Jane.
Sure.
I'm going to share that as a follow-up. And Matt, how about you? So now we're locked into the extrovert's perspective and you're not in person. So how does that impact things?
Well, certainly it's a lot easier as an extrovert to go out into a networking setting, feeling a bit more comfortable in person, face to face, being able to read the emotions a little bit better and read the room. So now how do we take that same enthusiasm and try to translate that online? And I completely agree with Jane. The amount of power that you will have through LinkedIn and social media is great. If I were in your position and I was looking to build a network, on LinkedIn every single day, just for an hour a day, reaching out to alumni from Widener and other people that have similar interests to yourselves, telling them that you'd like to connect, sending them a message saying, hi, I saw that you're alumni from Widener. I'm interested in your background. I'm interested in your career. Do you have a couple of minutes to chat, or would you just like to connect? And you'll find that people who are alumni are going to connect with you almost instantaneously. And even if they aren't the right person to speak to, say they work for a company that you want to work for, say they know somebody, you don't know who they can put you in touch with. I get reached out from my alumni all the time. And even though I don't know the person at the company, this is perfect. This is absolutely perfect. They might be able to put you in touch with the right person.
And Matt, just to expand on that a little bit, sometimes we'll get the question, what are the wrong things to do? Like, what is an example of an outreach that you might get on LinkedIn where you would think, nope, that's a little over the line, I wouldn't respond to that?
You never want to start with a sales pitch. And it happens every single day. Somebody will try to sell me a product that will make me $1 million by finding me more LinkedIn connections. They're based out of a country I've never even heard of. And they're just trying to generate as much cash as they possibly can. And I have no interest in that. So when you're starting, find something that gets somebody's interest. Hi, I saw that you just posted this article on LinkedIn. I thought it was really interesting. It relates to what I'm studying. Would you like to connect? Something as simple, as basic as that is a great way to start to build up that private, network that you might have on LinkedIn. It's a great place to start.
So it sounds like you're connecting and not selling.
Correct. You don't want to push for that. As you're starting to build a network, you'll find out you can get involved. You don't want to just build a network straight away, going straight into it saying, please give me a job at your company. That's never going to get you exactly what you're looking for. But if you say, I'd like to connect and hear more about your company, somewhere that I'm interested in applying to, once this whole coronavirus thing is over, can I buy you a cup of coffee to hear more? I will respond to that message every single time. And I have, and I will continue to go out for coffee with anybody who went to my school or anybody who had the courage to write to me and ask for me. And they're not trying to sell me something.
All right, so everyone who's on the call now, please make a note of that, because you can all reach out to Matt.
I'd be very disappointed if I don't get at least 6 requests by the end of this.
Awesome, thank you. And so I'm going to ask Jane that same question. What would be some approaches that you'd want to avoid, that having been on the receiving end of so many of these, that you would just be like, nope, that didn't land right?
Well, I totally agree with Matt when he said that it's really important to, when you're talking to somebody, to highlight either something about their company or something about them, to make a connection. And also to maybe don't go into great length to introduce yourself, but just give them a little overview. The other thing that I sometimes bristle at, if somebody demands or makes a request that they want to speak with me the next day, have some consideration that I'm busy. So I think when you're writing to somebody to set up an informational interview that be very respectful of their time and say, I know that you're very busy. Is it possible that we could set up some time in the next 2 weeks? But I think sometimes when I've had people say, can I talk to you tomorrow? I feel like, wow, it's pretty demanding. So.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And especially when the communication is all online, there's no visual cue to offset that. So we talked a little bit, Jane and Matt and I spoke a little before this call. And one thing we talked about was this ability to read the room, which of course you can do in person. And just wanted to speak a little bit about how that ability to kind of read the room, to use that intuition, how you could make that translate online. And we'll start with Matt.
Sure. So one of the skills that I quite like is I can walk into any sort of networking situation, whether it be a banquet, a gala, within about 5 minutes of looking around the room, I can usually tell who's open to chatting to new people, who doesn't want to chat to anybody, and who is, kind of more extroverted, introverted, and would be receptive to that. And I change how I approach people based on that. Now, when you go online, that's completely gone. It's black and white. Has anybody written a text or email that has come across weird or funny and you didn't mean for it? Happens all the time. So what you have to do when you're approaching this and trying to read the room, especially online if you're approaching, is I would suggest always coming across just a little bit softer and a little less aggressive than you think you are. Even if you think what you're doing is very, benign, asking somebody to connect on LinkedIn, I really appreciate your time. It might come across differently to somebody else. It happens to me all the time as an extrovert. I hit somebody who's an introvert, and the last thing that they want to do is talk to me because I came across the wrong way. Nothing bad, nothing ill intent. So when you're approaching people online, especially digital, be aware that it might not come across the way that you thought it would had you said it, had you had intonation, had you had inflection, and be a bit more gentle with how you're saying it, being a bit more appreciative of the person's time, as Jane was saying. And certainly just take a second time to make sure there's no grammatical mistakes, because that's also one of my pet peeves. If I read a message with a grammatical mistake, I'm like, no interest.
So thank you, Matt. And that's so interesting. It's almost sounding like you're saying maybe to take a few of the exclamation points off your communication and just step back a little bit.
Take a step back. Do not hit me with all capitalized letters. You must read this. But just be a little bit softer, be a bit more conversational, and it goes a long way. Doesn't necessarily have to be hugely formal either.
Okay, and how about you, Jane? How about this idea of reading the room from the introverted perspective and then add to the equation online?
Right. I was thinking it's just the opposite for introverts. So if you're on a Zoom network call or FaceTime, what introverts have to be careful of is they're so good at listening that they have to remember to speak up. So sometimes they can be in a situation where it's an extrovert or somebody who's talking a lot and they don't, they just get quiet, which is probably the worst thing. So what they have to do, I call it diplomatic interruption. They just basically have to speak up. And so maybe this person has been talking for a while. They might say, it might be helpful if I told you a little bit about my experience. Or maybe the speaker starts to talk about economic trends. And you say, we just talked about that in my economics class. But it's very important for introverts not to disappear. And they can easily do it if there is a lot of people in the network group, or even if it's one-to-one and somebody's talking a lot. So.
Thank you for that, Jane. So it sounds like whereas Matt was saying to step back a little bit, your advice to introverts might be to amplify the message even more than you would think to.
Right. Well, make sure that they get heard. That's what's really important.
Got it. So I just want to share with everyone listening that you're welcome to send any questions into the chat, and Matt and Jane can answer them in real time. We'll be going to Q&A in just a few minutes. So Matt and Jane, if you had a wish of what you wished employers would understand about either introverts or extroverts to be better understood, what would it be? And Jane, I'll start that with you if that's okay.
That is a great question. I wish that they would be more comfortable with people who are a little bit more reserved and quiet. Because sometimes it's misinterpreted as somebody who isn't energetic or involved, when really what's going on is that introvert is taking in that information, very carefully and thinking about it. So I wish that we live in a very extroverted culture, and we're rewarded for speaking up and taking action. And it is important for introverts to do that, but I think we could all get some value out of being just quiet sometimes. So I wish employers were a little bit more understanding of some pauses and some quiet and people taking time to respond.
Okay, thank you for that, Jane. Really appreciate that perspective. And how about you, Matt? What would be on your wish list for employers to understand about extroverts, or what do you think can be misunderstood?
It's funny. I'm trying to avoid the yin yang comparison back and forth between. Well, my option is just the opposite, introvert.
Right.
No, that's great.
But to a certain extent, with extroverts, because we come across so clearly and so quickly and so forcefully, sometimes employers miss the point that we have an ability to do a level of analysis, not nearly as deep as an introvert might be doing, but we also have that ability. We're more likely to make mistakes. That's absolutely true. Talk to any introvert, extrovert, they'll tell you that. But to have an understanding that just because you're moving fast as an extrovert doesn't mean that you're completely ignoring what the other person is saying. You're not ignoring, you're engaged in the conversation just in a way that's different from somebody else. But so it's a little bit, it's almost the exact opposite of what Jane was saying before. You have to be aware that when you speak with confidence, people believe it and people listen to you. But you also have to understand that maybe sometimes you're right, maybe sometimes you're wrong as well. I wish employers would know that, at least.
Yeah, that's great. And it's great to have the two perspectives. So before we shift to any questions, just if you could give any kind of last words of advice, building on strengths for virtual networking, whether you're an introvert or extrovert or somewhere in between, what would that be? And Matt, we'll kick it back to you for that.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, so if you had just a few words of advice to leave our students and our alumni with today about networking virtually from the extrovert perspective, what would you like them to take away more than anything else?
More than anything else, I would like all of you to understand that by taking part in this seminar, you have already started the process of building a very strong network. By being personally known by Janet, who is an amazing person, as well as your fellow alumni, those are two very easy, natural networks to get involved with today. What you guys don't understand, and maybe it's just because there's a lot of information coming at you, is how much time and effort the Career Center is putting into making sure that you are most successful leaving Widener. They want you to lean on it. They want you to lean on the alumni network. That's why they're putting these things together. So take advantage of it. Be the student who's trying to find a job with the Career Center. They're there to help. Don't go back and think you have to do this all by yourself. Make sure you're really looking for help and that you talk with the right people who want to help you as well.
Thank you, Matt. And I promise we didn't ask Matt to say that, but absolutely, that's why our colleagues are here. We'll be here through the spring, through the summer, really forever as an alumni. So we do want to be here for you, especially at this time, whether it's for an individual appointment, for our walk-in hours, for more of these workshops. So thank you for that, Matt, and thank you for those words of advice. And Jane, let's turn that back to you.
Well, I think advice probably for anyone, but maybe especially for introverts who are sometimes feeling a little reserved about reaching out to people they don't know, is to have realistic goals. Networking is about building a relationship and having a conversation. It doesn't necessarily lead to a job, but it may in the future. And the other thing to think about is, if you're nervous, is that people like to talk about themselves. So when you give them an opportunity to do that, you know, you can get a really nice flow. And I have to say, people who have been out there for a while, like me, very much enjoy talking to younger people, because I've been happy in my career and life, and I want you to transcend and do equally well. So I think if you keep in mind that people do really want to help you most of the time, you won't feel so anxious about getting in touch. And if you do get nervous, you know, everybody gets a little nervous sometimes talking to people they don't know. Don't fight it, you know, just say, I'm nervous, but I'm going to be okay. And actually, some deep breathing works. If you just sort of breathe in a little bit before you talk to someone, you know, that can be helpful. But I think, you know, my message to introverts would be feel the fear and do it anyway.
Jane, thank you. And it helps to normalize the anxiety, as you just said, that it's okay to feel a little nervous. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lauren Barlow, who's a senior career counselor in our office. And Lauren is going to share some questions that have been coming in from Matt and Jane.
Great.
Thank you. Matt, could you do me a favor? Could you clarify a little bit about your comments about when someone reaches out to you not to sell something? Like, is there a difference between not selling maybe a product versus selling themselves?
Absolutely. So when I say selling, I'm thinking of more in the hard sales tactic. People approach me all the time saying, you need to pay for my training, pay for my seminar, pay for this. That's not what I want to do. But there is a way to sell yourself without selling yourself. And I know that sounds a little bit paradoxical, but it's true. If somebody approaches me and they want to have a conversation about something that I'm interested in, in the midst of that conversation, they seem confident, they seem intelligent, and they seem friendly, that's a way of selling yourself in a way that you don't have to say, look how friendly I am, look how confident I am, look how intelligent I am. So in the digital world where you're going to be having these conversations, it's more how you come across in those messages. So if you take a second to look through my LinkedIn post history and say, you posted this Economist article, I read through it, it was interesting, but I disagreed with this point. You're selling yourself in a way that's a lot more interesting to me. I want to continue. I want to be engaged with that conversation. I don't necessarily need to, you're not saying, please help me, please help me, please help me. I'm totally lost. Do you see what I'm saying? Does that clarify things a little bit about what I mean if I don't sell?
Thank you. That is wonderful. All right, another question we have is, where can I find contacts that are outside of LinkedIn?
Well, I'd be happy to speak to that. I think about friends, family, relatives. You never know who they know. Also, you may have taken a course with a professor that might have some industry experience, that he might have contacts for you. But also, professional associations can be really valuable, and they often have a student chapter. And the purpose of professional associations is to educate their members, but to also educate the public. So often if you go to their web page, like the American Marketing Association, for an example, they'll have a list of their board members with emails. So you can very easily connect with them and let them know that you're exploring the field and would like to talk to somebody in their association, you know, who has some expertise. The other thing is now, you know, a lot of networking events or a lot of presentations are on Zoom or online. And where you might have gone to a panel and been impressed by the speaker, you can be equally impressed by a speaker on Zoom. And you might want to email them after to set up some time to talk with them, you know, highlight something that you learned during the presentation. And then I just tell you a really quick story. It's an out-of-a-box story of a client who read the Philadelphia Business Journal, and there was an article about a startup, and she really, whatever they were doing was fascinating to her. And they mentioned the CEO. It was a small startup, and she emailed him to let him know that she had read this article and that she didn't know if he had any positions, but that was okay. She would really like to meet with him to learn more about, what the company was doing. And he did respond. They met. He didn't have a job for her at that point, but 2 months later, he actually hired her. So I guess that's a second networking story, but sometimes thinking outside of the box, you'd be surprised how you might find some really interesting contacts.
That's great. And I think that's a really good point about, attending webinars and virtual meetings within your association. We can't meet up with someone after and exchange business cards, but you can get the contact information of the presenters and follow up that way. That's really helpful. Another question we have is, if both of you, so what is one thing that anyone could do today to get started networking? What would be, if there was like one action item to do after this Zoom, what would that be?
I think the one thing that you would have to do, and I know I've said LinkedIn a million times, and you guys are probably tired of it, but what you should be doing is creating a nice LinkedIn profile, connect with all of your career people, everybody who's in the career department, and then just start connecting with as many people as you can in the Philadelphia area who went to Widener. And you'd be surprised, there's probably, 200-300 people who you can connect with very quickly. And as soon as you start that network, it gives you a good starting place to start doing that today. Also, just as Jane said, if you know what industry you're looking to get into and you know what kind of companies you want to work for, I would say certainly reach out to friends, family, anybody who will listen to you. And you'd be surprised. Somebody will know somebody who knows somebody who wants to help you out.
I think that's great advice. I think it's important to manage this. So sometimes when I've worked with clients, they're so overwhelmed. Like somebody gave them a name here, they have to do their research. Should they be contacting 5 people a day? And I think take a baby step. So my guess is you already have one contact. And if not, find one today. And then this week, send out an introductory letter and see if you can set up a networking meeting. So it's just taking baby steps and moving forward.
Good, thank you. Janet, how much more time do we have questions for?
So probably for one more question.
One more question? Okay. Have you guys ever been inconvenienced by someone reaching out to you? The question is, sometimes I feel like I would be bothering someone if I reached out to them to ask for help. Do you find this to be true?
Well, you never know unless you try. But I'm sure there are some people, if they don't want to be helpful, they're probably not going to respond to you. But in general, if somebody says, sure, I'd be happy to talk with you. And I know that when you're not working and you're a student, you think, well, people are too busy. But I think, as I said before, that a lot of people find it very rewarding to reach out to a recent graduate or a young professional and give some advice and share their expertise. So I think, I guess I would say get over it. I understand the reserve, but just, you'll be surprised. And you may run into somebody who, seems, not interested or not that helpful. So what? Just move on to the next contact.
I have to agree completely with what Jane's saying. If there are people that are nervous about inconveniencing somebody or, more generally just failing at this, I can break that notion for you very quickly. The answer is yes, you're going to inconvenience people. You're going to fail. And I hope that that's more liberating for you than it is detrimental, to hear that it's okay to make mistakes. You're going to catch somebody who got cut off in traffic 20 minutes before you message them, and they're going to write you back something angry. Not your fault, not your problem. Just move on and keep on practicing. I promise you, I promise you, I promise you. For every bad response that you get, for every no response you get, you're going to get somebody who's going to want to reach out with you and want to help you. Jane, I'm a bit surprised that you went full extrovert and said, just get over it. I'm a pretty wasn't expecting it, but it's the truth. You're good. For every 100 LinkedIn messages that you're going to get, you might only get 5 people who respond back to you, just to manage your expectations. But guess what? Those are 5 people who said, I want to help. I'm interested. I'm engaged. You now have an audience to work with. And that's how you start. And you just got to keep on pushing and keep on going for you. I promise the more you do this, the better you'll get. And look, I meant to say this earlier when Jen was talking about advice. It's okay to feel nervous. It's okay to feel anxious. I still get anxious. Just 2 minutes before this phone call, I was like, oh Jesus, my room looks. It happens. It doesn't matter. You just have to push through because it will get better. It will get easier. And I promise it all works.
And I just want to add one quick thing. First of all, introverts have to embrace their strengths, but also integrate extroverted skills, or they'll, not get too far. But another important thing is be sure after you meet someone online, wherever, that you follow up with a thank you note. And if you've had a really good rapport with them, ask them if it would be okay if you stayed in touch with them. Because follow-up's really important, because that person might, in 3 or 4 months, be able to help you as you apply for different jobs. So,
Thank you.
And with that, I just want to acknowledge Jane and Matt for answering those questions. Jane, that was such a helpful final point to close the loop, to have that acknowledgement that people feel heard. And Matt, thank you also for sharing that you get nervous sometimes too, because I'm sure that's reassuring to people on the call. So we want to close by thanking both Jane and Matt, as well as everyone who attended, also my colleagues on the Career Design and Development team. We will be posting for seniors in the new Senior Resource Hub on My Widener materials that Jane and Matt and our other guest experts will be sharing, and they will also be forwarded to our alumni attendees as well. So I want to thank everyone. I know that some of you are transitioning to 1 o'clock classes. Thank you so much for joining us today. And again, a huge thank you to Matt and to Jane.
oh, my pleasure.
Not a problem. Thank you very much.
What is it? How do I get that?